shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. Pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. Pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. You are here, you're moving in our midst. I worship you, I worship you. 'Cause you are here, you're working in this place. I worship you, I worship you. 'Cause you are here, you're moving in our midst. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, you're working in this place. I worship you, I worship you. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 'Cause you are here, you're touching every heart. And I worship you, I worship you. 'Cause you are here, you're healing every heart. I worship you, I worship you. 'Cause you are here, you're turning lives around. And I worship you, I worship you. 'Cause you are here, you're mending every heart. And I worship you, and I worship you, yeah. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the dark. when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. 'Cause even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. 'Cause even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. 'Cause even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop, 'cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Oh, that is who you are. That is who you are. Oh, that is who you are. That is who you are. Oh, that is who you are. That is who you are. Oh, that is who you are. That is who you are.
Every night we put Everly to bed, and one of the things we always do with her is we read books. And she gets to pick the books that she's gonna read. So she goes over to her wall of books and she picks out her favorite books. And right now she has this pink Disney princess book, which is her absolute favorite. And I think it's her favorite because it is by far the biggest book that she has. And she always picks what story she wants, and I kind of get sick of reading these stories, and they're a little bit longer than the ones I want to read. So I interject my own story. I make up my own lines and my own story, and I read it a little bit faster than it would have gone if I read the thing. But I was thinking about like this idea of like stepping into a story and just changing it. And I thought, like, how many times in our life have we wished that someone could just take control of our story and maybe just change the way it's going, maybe make it go a little bit faster? You know, whether it's a relationship that you're in, you just wish it would go a little bit better, you know, our finances, our work. You know, if someone would just alter the story of my life, I feel like it would be so much better. You know, we believe that God is the author and the finisher of our faith, the author of the story of our life, and that we believe He is writing a story through our life. And there's moments when it just feels like, you know, like the bottom is falling out. The weight of the world is just a little bit too much right now, and you need someone to change the direction of the story of your life. If you ever had that, you are in the right place, because we believe that we have a God who is a miracle worker, and that God still does miracles today. You know, He's writing a story now, and with His words, He can change the course in everything that is in your life. Psalm 77:14 says, "You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the peoples." You know, we still believe this. What would it look like to lean into that miracle working power of God? You know, we're gonna look at two different stories today, which are really just one really long story. And in the story, there's two different miracles that happen, but in the middle of these two miracles is where I think a lot of us, we find ourselves in our lives today. So I want to talk to you about what do you do in the middle of your miracles. And the passage we're looking at today is Mark 6, and it's gonna be 30 to 52. And this is what it says. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to Him all that they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat. He said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place, but many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, He had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So He began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so His disciples came to Him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than a half year's wages. Are we going to spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties, taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up to the heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on the land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down, and they were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. It wasn't the storm that they didn't understand or walking on water. It was the loaves that they didn't understand. You need to see these 2 stories together. The disciples are hungry, and Jesus said, "Hey, why don't you guys just take a break, head to the other side of the lake, get away from the people, get some rest, something to eat, and I'll catch up with you in a little bit." So the disciples take off to the other side, and the crowd sees the disciples taking off, and they have this thought that wherever the disciples go, Jesus tends to show up. So they take off running because they say, if I can just be where the disciples are, I know that Jesus will show up. They have this expectation that if we can just get to where Jesus is, maybe he will heal us. Maybe we'll see a miracle happen. Maybe he's going to say something new and unique about God that we have never heard before, but they are filled with this great expectation that if I can just be in the presence of God, miracles are going to happen. I wonder how much of us, our level of expectation determines how much we receive from God. How many of us show up to church on a Sunday thinking, God is going to do amazing things. God is going to change us, expecting something dramatic to happen, that a miracle is going to happen in the presence of God. I know that I'm a pastor and that I think a little bit differently than most people, but for a Sunday service, I think, why would people show up late? Why would you not come every single week? Because when we are in God's presence, that is when amazing things happen. That is when miracles show up. God will do incredible things when we are in his presence. And so on Sunday mornings, we gather together because we believe that where 2 or 3 or more are gathered, God shows up. That God will do a miracle. And I want to be where God is. And so our story, it tells us, the disciples are panicked. Jesus starts teaching and they haven't eaten yet. Teaching's great, but let's be honest, Jesus, he can kind of talk all day. You got to get something to eat. And I love what the disciples do. They do this passive aggressive thing, and they come up to him instead of saying, "Hey Jesus, can we just take a break, run to Chick-fil-A because it's Saturday, it's still open, and just grab something to eat." They don't do that. Instead, they come up and they kind of blame the people. Jesus, it's not us. We could listen to you talk all day long. I've got no problem with that, but these people, they're so hungry. How about we just have a short teaching right now and we just take a recess, we grab something to eat, and then we can all come back and keep going. Jesus doesn't say to them, "Yeah, that sounds good." Instead, he says, "Why don't you give them something to eat?" Now, it tells us there are 5,000 men there, but that doesn't count the women and the children. It's more like 15 to 20,000 people are there. And just for reference, the Golden One Center where the Sacramento Kings play, it can seat 17,608 people. Imagine that many people on a mountainside, and Jesus looks at you and says, "Why don't you just give them something to eat?" Now, for a long time, I've heard this line wrong. He isn't saying you have to do it. And if we think that it's missing the whole point of this story, he's asking, what do you have that's available to you? Often we go to God saying, I've got nothing, and he asks us a simple question, what is in your hands? we miss oftentimes that the ingredients for a miracle are always in our midst. We have everything that we need for God to do a miracle in our life. The disciples go looking for food, and there's like 15 to 20,000 people, and they get to this point where they can find one boy who has a lunch. It's like 5 pieces of bread, 2 pieces of fish. It's the filet-o-fish from McDonald's. It's nothing too exciting. And one of the things I've never really thought about when reading this story is there's absolutely no way that was the only food that was there. 15 to 20,000 people show up and only one little kid brings a lunch. Like, that's absolutely impossible. But the thing that I find interesting is the meal came from one of the kids who wasn't counted. Because scripture would only count the men, like women and children weren't counted, and they should be counted because we believe men and women and children are all equal and count. But at that time, they didn't. So a child who wasn't even bothered to be counted was the one who brought the food. But it was packed by his mother. Do you ever think that his mom woke up that morning and says, you know what? Let me throw some fish and some bread together, just do my normal morning routine, thinking that her ordinary routine is going to be the exact thing that God is going to use for the beginning of a miracle. There's absolutely no way. She's just doing what she did, just going about her normal life. And the thing that we see is God takes your ordinary and makes it extraordinary. We don't know why nobody else stepped up. We don't know why no one else said, yeah, I've got food, I can pitch in. How often do we think this way? God, I don't have the ability to serve, or I'm not good enough. And all God is asking is, are you available? Will you use what you have to make a difference for him? The disciples have this kid's lunch, and they're probably thinking, this is absolutely impossible. It won't even feed us, let alone everyone else. God, John gets hungry. There's no way that this can feed him and everybody else. We've got to do something else. And one of them does the math and says, this is going to take a half a year's salary. I think they thought, if I just bring Jesus this little bit that I have, and I bring it to him, he's going to look at it and see that we don't have enough. And so they bring this meal to him, and he sees it, and he's faced with the impossible. See, I think oftentimes we ask God for the wrong thing. It seems kind of weird to say that, but there's a difference between this idea of miracles and management. We often go to God asking him for management issues when I think we're supposed to come to God with miracles. What do I mean by that, right? We're saying, God, I need you to bless my finances. And God's looking at us and saying, are you managing your finances the way I've asked you to? Are you living within your means? Are you putting God first? Are you bringing to God the 10% that's called a tithe? Are you honoring him with it? If we're not, why do we keep asking God, I just need you to show a miracle? And God says, are you using what I've given you the way I asked? God, I need you to help me with my health. And then we're like, God, hold on one second. I'm just going to order a 4x4 fries and a shake, from In-N-Out. And I'm not going to do exercise. And God kind of looks at us and says, have you heard of a salad? Maybe a little exercise. And for how many things do we come to God saying, God, I need you to show up? And God's saying, I've given you everything you need. It's a management issue and not a miracle. I wonder how many of us go to God with these management issues when we should be coming to God with our miracles. But why does this matter? I think it's huge. Because if you do it on your own, you get the credit. If it's something that I can do on my own ability, no one's going to look at it and say, oh, wow, God showed up. Braden ate a salad today. Well, maybe. But when something impossible happens, when I go to God with a miracle, something that I cannot do, something that I cannot imagine, that is exactly where God begins to work. At my end is where God begins. The impossible is where God begins. And when God shows up in those moments, people are going to look at it and say, you know what? That could only happen because God shows up. Matthew 19:26 says, Jesus looked at them and said, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. So Jesus takes this little kid's lunch and he lifts it up to heaven and he gives thanks. This is a big deal. When we face our lack or our need, we tend to curse instead of thanking God for what we already have, right? I'm guilty of this. God, I don't have enough. How can you bless me when I don't have enough to pay my bills? I don't have enough, to get my work done, much less take care of my family. My house is too small. My job is too constricting. We have all these things that we love to complain about. And how many of us We go to God with our lack and we think it's not enough, it's never enough. Our lack is oftentimes the seed God wants to use to multiply as a blessing. What if instead of cursing your small house, you thank God that you had a roof over your head and a place to call home? What if you gave God thanks for what you feel you lack? That God, though I may not have enough, I'm grateful that I have this. The thing that we miss is God never asks you to do everything. He never asks anyone that they have to do it all. He asks everyone to do something. God never asks you to do everything, and that's required for you to achieve the purpose and plans in our lives. But instead, he says, do something with what you have. Because Jesus takes the little, he blesses it and gives it back. God uses the brokenness as a catalyst to achieve things in our life. God breaks the bread, and when the bread is broken, he uses it to do amazing miracles. We often think, I am too broken. But what if brokenness is the prerequisite that God needs to actually use you? What if brokenness was a thing that God uses to launch you into the life he has for you? I think we're so used to hiding our scars and our pain that we miss the fact that God uses our brokenness to help others. There is a Japanese form of art, and it's called kintsugi, where they would take these broken pieces of pottery and they would repair it. Instead of adding glue and painting over it so you can no longer see what is broken, instead they would take these broken pieces, they would add gold to the glue, and they would repair the pieces. So instead of hiding the broken pieces, instead they show what was once broken. It's highlighting the brokenness. They would highlight it because what once was priceless because it was broken is now some of the most valuable pieces of art because someone understood that broken can be beautiful when it's seen through a different lens. God sees your brokenness as a launching pad for a miracle to happen. The miracle doesn't happen in Jesus' hands. Instead, it happens in your own hands. I believe that this is what tithing is. God never asks one person to carry the whole financial weight of the church and the missions around the world. He invites all of us to do our part, to bring our first 10%. So we give thanks. God, you have given me everything that I have, and I'm going to give you back the 10%. It's kind of like God takes our money and he breaks it. And he gives us back the 90% and he says, here, live with this. But this 90 is going to be blessed. See what happens when it's blessed. It multiplies, miracles happen. You can do so much more with the 90 if you trust and you see what I can do. In the same way it happens with the disciples when it's in their hands and they feed the 15 to 20,000 people. And they get done feeding them and there is food left over. There's 12 baskets full. And so it's kind of like an odd thing, did God just create, 12 doggy bags for the disciples? And some people say it's the numbers are important, but I actually think there's 12 baskets left over because he knew that they were going to go hungry and they just needed a doggy bag to go, which is one of those things that to me it's kind of odd because if I'm a disciple, I'm going to be, Jesus, honestly, I don't really like leftover food. So just send it home with the people and then I'll go find a steak later when we're hungry. You can multiply it and things will be good, right? But Jesus knew that they needed food to go because they were going to go into a storm and he wanted them to have a reminder of the miracle working power that he had. I think some of us, we leave one miracle behind and we leave all trace and remembrance of it. And we absolutely forget that God had done something amazing in our life. Has God done a miracle in your life? If you've made the decision to follow Christ, he has done a miracle. He has literally taken you from death to life. Yes, there has been a miracle in your life. He has made a way to God, a way to spend eternity with him because he is the way maker. Has he healed you? Has he healed a relationship, your broken heart? Has there been any miracle in your life? Jesus knew that just like in verse 45 when it says, immediately the disciples. If we are not careful, immediately we leave behind the old. We leave behind the miracle that God has done and we forget everything that God had done. But God sends the disciples off with a memory, with these doggy bags of leftovers. Why in the world does he do this? Because he knew that so often we need a physical reminder that God has been at work, that when the storm happens, I need something to hold on to, that I can see that God is at work, right? This happens to us all the time, right? God has been good. He has been faithful. He has provided. He's taken care of me. He's healed me. He's saved me. He has done all of these things, but for so often I find myself in the moment, immediately in another storm, and I'm panicked. The disciples were panicked. Jesus knows that the storm is coming, and yet he sends the disciples into the storm because the storm reveals who we are and what we actually believe. The disciples are on this boat, they're freaking out, and Jesus he casually strolls by. I think this is what it looks like. He's casually walking by and just drops the peace sign. And so they are freaking out. He gets into the boat, the storm calms, and he reveals to them that he is the God who provides. He is also the God over nature. There's this ancient belief that if you could control nature, that you were God. Like anyone can do a cool magic trick, but only God can control nature. So whatever life seems to throw at you in the middle of the storm, you can be reminded that God is both good and will provide in one season. And when you find yourself in another storm, who is going to be there? It's the Waymaker himself. What would it look like if you found yourself in a storm of life, confused by what is happening, and you reminded yourself that the Waymaker who made a way in the past will always be with you in the middle of your storm? How differently would you live your life if you knew that he has been with you and he will be with you? The greatest indicator of future performance is past performance. If he has been faithful and good in the past, he will be faithful and good in the future. What if we decided to have a confidence like this, that he is with us, that he will make a way when it seems as if there is no way? When you are at the end of your rope, you can find yourself at the end of your possibility, and instead of seeing this as the end, you see it as the beginning of what God is about to do. You know, God, you are good and you will make a way when there is no way. You know, I know you're all facing a lot right now. We're facing incredible things right now, but all I can help but think right now as your pastor is this is the exact moment that God gets to flex his muscle. This is the moment that God gets to show up because we cannot fix this on our own. So we need a God to step in, a God who can make a way. And so I want to end with this thought. Where do you need someone to make a way where there seems to be no way? Amen.
The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace.
Oh, and hey Alexa, play Led Zeppelin.
Farther along, I know all about it. Farther along, understand why. So cheer up, my brothers, live in the sunshine. Will understand this all by and by. Tempted and tried, I wonder why the good man dies, bad man thrives, and Jesus cries 'cause he loves them both. We're all castaways in need of rope, hanging on by the last threads of our hope. In a house, a mirror full of smoke, confusing illusions I've seen. But where did I go wrong? I sang along to every chorus of the song that the devil wrote, like a piper at the gate, leading by some men down to their fate. Some will courageously escape the seductive voice with the heart of faith, while walking the line back home. There's so much more to life than we've been told. It's full of beauty that will unfold and shine like you struck gold, my wayward son. The dead weight burden weighs a ton. I'll go down to the river and let it run, wash away all the things you've done. Forgiveness, alright.
Still I get hard pressed on every side, between the rock and the compromise, like truth in a pack of lies fighting for my soul. I got no place left to go, 'cause I got changed by what I've been shown. There's more glory than the world has known. It keeps me rambling on and skipping like a calf loosed from his stall. I'm free to love once and for all, and even when I fall, I get back up through the joy that overflows my cup. Heaven filled me with more than enough, broke down my levees and my bluffs, let the flood wash me. And one day when the sky rolls back on us, some rejoice and the others fuss, 'cause every knee must bow and tongue confess the Son of God, He's forever blessed. His is the kingdom and we're the guests, so put your voice up to the test. Sing, Lord.